Story 1. It seems that the comments are confused about whether you mean overpopulation or a declining birth rate. Story 2. The issue seems obvious to me. I cannot believe it is not obvious to others. Increase the quality of life for the average person. Most of my friends are not having children because of the cost of living and fear of the future. Story 3. Life as a parent is much harder than life without children. If it were easier and less expensive, more people would do it. Story 4. Make it possible for people who have just graduated from college or university to purchase a home and earn a living wage. It is difficult to consider having children when someone works 3 jobs just to barely cover rent and food. Story 5. Infinite growth is not possible. At some point, the global population needs to stabilize, and it may even need to decrease somewhat if we cannot be more efficient in how we use resources. Story 6. I will preface this by saying I am not college educated and this is just a personal opinion. So please do not destroy me. The birth rate itself is not the main problem in my view. The concern is the number of future taxpayers and workers, at least from the government's perspective. Different industries are already feeling the effects, and it will only get worse as specialists age. The government must take many small steps over a long period to incentivize people to earn degrees, attend vocational schools, and maintain a work-life balance that allows them to pursue education while making raising a family feasible. Many people feel disenfranchised, and it can be easier not to pursue having children. Create better legislation at the state level to clarify what the state can do for people who want to return to school. Subsidize childcare, children's health care, and other child-related services. Make the idea of raising a family less overwhelming. I think some of the above would help. I am aware we are seeing a decline globally in almost all first world countries. I think that indicates some common problems. I could be wrong. Story 7. Why is it a problem? The world is already overpopulated and its population needs to decline. Story 8. There is no problem. There are too many people and the system is correcting itself slowly. Story 9. I would not monkey with it. In my country, people of childbearing age are child-free by choice in record numbers. If that trend continues, our overpopulation problem will solve itself, or at least move the needle in the right direction. Story 10. Does it need fixing? There are more people who could work but are not employed, and more who could have children but cannot afford the cost. Then there is the catch-22. I think we need to learn from the older generation in some respects. Story 11. Is it a problem? The world is already overpopulated, and allowing population numbers to decline would probably help the planet. Story 12. Problem? Fix? Let people live their lives. We have plenty of people. Story 13. The Economist wrote a very interesting series of articles showing that most common assumptions about the decline of birth rates in the West, a potentially lethal challenge to our societies, are not what you would expect. According to their data, which is strong, the middle class has not changed its behavior and remains just below replacement levels. The biggest change is among the working class. The film Idiocracy got it wrong, ironically. Much of the decline is due to improved sex education programs that have sharply reduced teenage pregnancies and other unintended births. Another factor is that many more women are middle class in the sense of attending university and pursuing careers. Finally, economic hardship among the working class has increased, leading to fewer births. The solution will be difficult. Policy should focus on poorer people. Housing and welfare can achieve some, but not all, of the needed change. The Nordic countries show that even a reasonably strong welfare net does not guarantee sustained high birth rates. The second part is likely cultural. Finding a better way to form partnerships in modern societies, a European marriage pattern 2.0, so to speak. Involuntary celibacy and singlehood are rising rapidly and are likely to get worse. We need better ways to form relationships and raise families, including financial support from government, cheaper access to housing, and partnership norms suited to sexual liberation and equal opportunity, whatever those norms may be. Story 14. Cut funding to sex education and education in general. Bon contraceptives. Keep people poor. Eliminate Social Security so people need their children to care for them in old age. Basically combine elements of poverty-ridden countries, the Catholic Church, and Project 2025. Or did you mean in a way that does not make life worse for everyone except the ultra-rich? Story 15. The world is overpopulated. We do not have a birth rate problem. Story 16. I have yet to see anyone explain why a declining population is bad for humanity in the long term. More resources, more food, more space, and so on. Story 17. I do not want to fix this world. Most people alive now suffer, so if fewer people are born, overall suffering would be reduced. Until we can improve things, it seems unfair to bring an innocent child into a divided and hateful world. Story 18. Allowing more people to be sterilized or to have abortions if they wish so the world will not remain overpopulated. In the end, it is too late. We fucked it up. Story 19. It is not necessarily a problem. The population boomed and is now balancing out. To encourage people to have children, it needs to be more affordable. In the United States, it is expensive just to give birth. Around the world, childcare, extracurricular activities, food, clothing, and hygiene products are all very expensive. Story 20. It's not a problem. The world is overpopulated anyway. Choosing not to have children is perfectly fine. Story 21. When I was born, the world population was about 4 billion people. 55 years later, it was 8 billion. When you say the birth rate is a problem, you mean you think certain kinds of people in certain places are not having enough children and that this should be fixed, usually by pressuring women. But our species is not in danger of dying out anytime soon except from the burdens we are placing on the ecosystem. No one has an obligation to have children if they do not want to. Story 22. I would not. We do not have enough skilled jobs for everyone. There are too many people on this planet and not enough skilled jobs for everyone. This is compounded by artificial intelligence and robots taking more jobs each year. We could try relocating people from other countries, but that is proving problematic as well. We need to think about how we are going to take care of the people we already have. Story 23. Why would I do anything of the sort? It is all going swimmingly according to plan. Story 24. Give people education and decent living conditions. It is really that simple. Who would want to have children in such a terrible world? Story 25. Personally, I don't think declining birth rates are a bad thing. Humans are a bad thing, so the fewer of us overall, the better. At this point, humans deserve extinction. Story 26. Please fix the climate before adding more people to the planet. Honestly, even if the climate were fixed, I do not think scaling back our exponential growth is a bad idea. We also need to address our deteriorating societies and push back against the xenophobic nationalism that has surged across the globe before we expose children to it. Story 27. I wouldn't. It's not a problem. There are too many people. Story 28. Restore the housing and essential cost-to-income ratio to what it was in the glory days. Story 29. It is not a problem. 8 billion people are 6 billion too many. Story 30. There is no birth rate problem. The real issue is economic. Too much greed. Story 31. Change the societal structures that make this a problem in the first place. In the long term, a smaller population is preferable in terms of the ecological footprint we leave on the planet. Exponential growth in consumption per capita and in population needs to be stopped. A gradual population decline is beneficial given current circumstances. Story 32. I think giving people more time would make them more likely to have children. Jobs aside, we have become much better at entertaining ourselves with infinite scrolling on social media, games, and so on. We should work fewer hours or fewer days. With automation, I do not expect productivity to be an issue, especially in high-income countries. More time lets people continue activities they enjoy and makes having a child feel like less of a sacrifice. Also, things like daycare and school become less of a hassle when parents have more time to spend with their children. Story 33. Policies for the working class. Universal health care, raising the minimum wage, affordable housing, and controlling corporate price gouging. Make having children more affordable. Many people would like to have children but do not because of the expense and hardship. Story 34. I do not see a problem. Advances in robotics and computer technology have made many jobs that people once did obsolete, and they will continue to do so. We need sufficient resources to care for the elderly. Story 35. To get me to have children, I would need more than anything an ultimate painless exit strategy. That could be as basic as a comfortable supply of high-grade pharmaceuticals to get me through the 33 years it took me to become fully independent from my parents and the ensuing lifetime after realizing those years and my youth are gone. Or a complicated system of social workers and medication to help us cope with the separation process if we decided it was not working out. Story 36. More gay people. It is not going to happen by accident. Gay male. Story 37. Return to the economic policies in place before President Ronald Reagan's administration. We had free college, financial assistance for single parents, free daycare, and medical insurance for low-income families. Those programs lifted millions of people out of poverty. I benefited from those programs and was able to attend college and get a job that allowed me to support my family independently. Story 38. One of the biggest barriers to having children today is not just financial, it is isolation. Modern life, especially in urban areas, has created a nuclear family bubble in which parents are expected to raise children with little or no support from extended family or the community. This isolation increases stress, financial burden, and burnout. To address this, we need to rethink how communities are designed. Story 39. Pay people more. Make housing affordable. Hold corporations accountable for the recent high inflation so families can afford to have children. Educate people on the basics of the economy. Offer parenting classes. Story 40. We must make life better for people and combat climate change. It is natural for a species to lower its birth rate to survive hard times, and that is what is happening. We need to abandon the every person for themselves mindset and work together to improve life on this planet. Story 41. What birth rate problem? Why do you think it needs fixing? Story 42. Give the population ample opportunity and motivation to start families. Housing, job availability, healthcare, and related supports all affect whether people choose to have children. Not everyone will want to settle down and have kids, and that is fine. The recent drop in birth rates is largely driven by socioeconomic factors that discourage people from having children, including the direct financial costs and logistical challenges of parenting, as well as the emotional and mental strain. Story 43. Worker-friendly policies that guarantee a living wage, reasonable working hours, and extended subsidized maternity leave to make childbirth and early childcare more manageable. Story 44. Strong social programs so people feel that it is safe to have children. Story 45. The only way to fix this is to create a socio-political environment in which young adults feel that starting a family is both economically feasible and personally fulfilling. This is not achieved by forcing women to carry pregnancies, gutting environmental regulations, or keeping working-class families impoverished. Story 46. Improve material conditions so people have the time and money needed to have and raise children. Story 47. Legalize voluntary euthanasia for terminal disease. If a person learns their brain is deteriorating and they will be confined to a nursing home for many years and lose basic functions such as swallowing, no one should force them to continue living if they are still of sound mind enough to make the decision. Subsidized on-site daycare for firms with greater than 100 employees at a location. Childcare credits provided to employees in firms with fewer than 100 employees. Any company that has completed a stock buyback in the last 10 years automatically moves to the top tax rate, with all loopholes closed for the next 2 years, and will undergo yearly audits to verify profitability. Story 48. Eliminate education entirely. No schools or educational programs. Make billionaires dukes and barons. Civilians are now the property of the lords, with mandatory breeding programs. Alternatively, implement a higher minimum wage, build more housing, and ensure basic needs such as shelter, healthcare, and food security. Story 49. Increase paternity and maternity leave to 1 year of paid leave. Reduce barriers to home ownership. Provide childcare subsidies. Provide employee protections for pregnant women. Implementing these policies will cause the population to increase rapidly. Story 50. Allow access to abortion services and normalize procedures such as vasectomies. Story 51. Female education. Let's get the birth rate down to 0. Story 52. Every country is worried about its declining birth rate, especially in the West, but globally we already have enough people. If we were more globalist than nationalist, we could work together and make migration easier. For example, by simplifying work permit processes and harmonizing education and qualifications so migrants can continue working in their fields. We are not at that level, so countries with declining birth rates will have to accept it and adapt. The most practical measures are to make home ownership affordable, make daycare cheaper, and invest in education. Story 53. Given the state of the economy in many places, it is hard to afford raising a child. The ages for major life events such as marriage, having children, and buying a home are being pushed later. Story 54. Income tax reductions have been proposed to encourage more women in the workforce to have children, as a way to offset the decrease in lifetime earnings the average woman experiences after having a child. One child, 50% income tax reduction until the youngest child turns 18. Two children, 75% income tax reduction until the youngest child turns 18. Three or more children, 100% income tax reduction until the youngest child turns 18. Story 55. Make the country's economy supportive of families and implement policies that encourage families to raise children. Animals do not reproduce in toxic environments. The same applies to humans. Story 56. Make it easy and enjoyable to have children by ensuring a high quality of life. Otherwise, people will not have children or will stop after one. Provide affordable housing and daycare, attractive recreational facilities such as parks and playgrounds, and jobs compatible with family life, including options for part-time work and a right to at least 1 year of maternity leave. Story 57. Focus on fixing the cost of living problem. I think the birth rate problem will resolve itself. Story 58. I'm not sure it's so much a birth rate issue as a society that is anti-maternity, anti-family, and unsupportive of working parents. Society has priced raising children out of reach and does not support working families with subsidized childcare. Story 59. If you want to increase it, improve the quality of life for people to the point where single-income families become the norm again. Story 60. I believe that the material and financial side of things is important. 2 full-time incomes are often required to sustain a family, and the costs of raising a child and of larger housing are significant. But the biggest factor is perspective on the future. An hour spent browsing the news and media will make it look like bringing a human into the world is a crime against that human. This is what needs to be fixed. Obviously, we cannot stop the world from having problems. We cannot, try as we might, make it appear problem-free. What we can do is put the world on an upward trajectory. We can start improving things from regional issues to geopolitics to climate change. Make it look like the world will be better for our children than it is for us. Also, produce more media that reflects the pleasant aspects of having a child. This is as much an actual effort as it is a media campaign, so it may seem unrealistic. Still, it is a potential solution. Another issue is that parenting remains an art while more and more things become science. People are beginning to realize that their parents' trial-and-error approach has left many lifelong consequences. It is reasonable to doubt yourself when the only example you have is a bad one. I think this mental burden can be lifted, at least partially, by compiling some educational material on the matter. I am not talking about a dozen books each saying something different. We need a more centralized effort. Story 61. Countries like Japan should offer better work-life balance and provide family support similar to what Korea does. With less financial and work-related stress, people may be happier and more willing to start a family. Story 62. Why have a child when the cost of living is so high? Most of your wages are gone as soon as you receive them. Rent is just eye-watering right now. Story 63. Give selected couples a tax break, because you do not want people with criminal records or low-income households to have 10 children they cannot raise properly. Story 64. As someone who wanted children but did not have them for financial reasons, I was concerned about the lack of affordable childcare and accessible healthcare. We could not afford to lose one income. We were also afraid of what would happen if our child had special needs. I have no family, and my then partner's family lived in another country. We were both working class and from disadvantaged backgrounds, so we had no family support. We did not have good health insurance. Any medical issue during pregnancy, birth, or with the baby would have been a huge problem. It felt unfair to try for a baby under these conditions. We did not want the child to live in poverty. If you want people to have more children, provide affordable, safe daycare, adequately fund schools, and offer universal health insurance so that a child's health issue is economically survivable. Story 65. If people can afford a home, food, and time to care for and love a child, they will have children. If people must work every waking hour for too little pay to live on, they will not have children. Story 66. Ensuring that people actually have the time and money is a great start. Story 67. Citizens receive a significant tax break for each child, so by the time they have 4 children, they are paying very little tax. Story 68. Create opportunities for both men and women to prosper economically. Ensure families have access to safe, affordable childcare. Protect employees from exploitation by employers by providing sufficient paid time off, so they can spend time with and enjoy their spouse and children. Ensure women have access to non-restrictive reproductive health care, including safe abortion when needed, so they can carry a pregnancy without fear of fatal complications. Ensure people have access to high-quality, affordable health care through public programs. Provide quality education for children. If you create an environment where people feel hopeful about the future and protect the time they need for a personal life, they will start families. Why would anyone start a family if they cannot spend time with that family, if having a family is unaffordable, if they are financially insecure, if they cannot get the care needed to have a family, or if they have no hope that they and their children will have a secure future? Story 69. You should not artificially stimulate the birth rate, just as you should not artificially stimulate the economy. If people cannot afford to have children, that is better for society because they are being responsible about the well-being of their future offspring. Story 70. Do not exploit your citizens with taxes to fund overseas spending. That would be a start. Story 71. Employees are being pressured to have more children to provide additional workers. Children are regarded as cheap labor and are considered necessary for the wealthy to sustain their lifestyles. Story 72. If you have 3 children in Poland, you pay no income tax. I heard that on the news. Story 73. To boost birth rates, you need to improve access to housing, healthcare, education, and jobs. Today, when you analyze any country's situation, you realize that the cost of living keeps rising, but wages are not keeping up. In the long run, this will only lead to poorer elderly people. Story 74. You adjust society to work with the population you have, not the population you want. Story 75. Since life expectancy has increased, a decrease in the birth rate is beneficial. Overpopulation is not a goal we should try to achieve. The space and resources we have are finite. Do not wish for them to fill up too soon. Story 76. Instead of making it harder to avoid having children by banning contraceptives, restricting abortion, or refusing sex education, make it easier and more attractive to have children. Offer tax breaks, affordable housing and childcare, paid maternity and paternity leave, and other supportive measures. Story 77. I would not. People do not want to have a lot of children when the ecosystem is on the brink of collapse. Any solution will be worse than simply having a smaller population. Story 78. Try to determine which economic policies would help and incentivize people to afford to raise children in the first place. It is hard to have children at age 25 when income is low because of student loan debt or low wages for people of that age. Childcare is very expensive, based on my personal experience. If you have the luxury of family willing to help, that is beneficial, but most people do not. Story 79. It is easy if you realize we do not have a birth rate problem. We have a government problem because institutions cannot adapt to changing times. We also have a corporate greed problem because senior executives refuse to sacrifice profits. Birth rates have always fluctuated. We cannot expect people to continue populating the earth if they cannot afford to feed themselves. Story 80. I would create an incentive plan based on the IQ of both parents. The higher their IQ, the greater the subsidies, payments, or tax cuts. Story 81. At least in the United States, daycare is far too expensive. I know the people who work there need a living wage, but daycare costs more than my mortgage and more than a one-bedroom apartment near my city for one child. It needs to be more affordable. Families need higher wages. Without a solid dual income, it is very difficult to cover basic expenses with a child. In heterosexual relationships, men should be more involved. You should know your child's medical history without calling the mother. Many women I know avoid having children because they do not want to be effectively a single parent while married. Gone are the days when men could be sole breadwinners and disengage from parenting. Many men are involved fathers, but the problem remains. Society should stop pressuring women to be superwomen who do it all. It is not possible. We need to restore community. Over recent decades, we have become more isolated and lost the village that made parenting feasible. It is very hard without one. Story 82. Compared with previous centuries, our population is still overpopulated. Story 83. The best thing that can happen is for our culture to stop treating family as less important than career goals or personal pleasure. This shift in mindset has poisoned our society. If young adults decide that building strong, healthy families is a worthwhile endeavor, the birth rate will increase. Story 84. Permit increased immigration to countries with low birth rates from countries with higher birth rates. This increases the taxpayer base for current and near-term retirees. Increase taxes on high-income earners to expand funding for Social Security, Medicare, and other social safety net programs. This helps ensure that new immigrants will have senior care when they are older, even if immigration stops and artificially boosted birth rates slow. Readjust growth targets to accommodate a shrinking or steady-state economy. Reduce military spending so funds are available for other priorities. Story 85. Provide comprehensive abortion care so women who want to become pregnant do not risk dying of sepsis after a miscarriage. Provide subsidized daycare. Increase maternity and paternity leave. Do not repeal the Affordable Care Act, commonly known as Obamacare, which would cause millions of people to lose health insurance and be unable to afford prenatal care and childbirth. Oppressing women and removing their choices does not make them more likely to want to have children. Story 86. Redefine economic stability to mean something other than infinite growth. Story 87. It's not a birth rate problem. It is a problem of spending and financing a future that requires fewer workers to do the same work we do now. Story 88. It does not need fixing. The economy, personal finances, the cost of living, and so on are what need fixing. Story 89. Ethically, better quality of life for everyone and a more sustainable lifestyle and future. Unethically, ban birth control and abortion and limit education. Story 90. Drop the whole richer gets richer scheme so people can actually afford to have children. Story 91. Help people who actually want children. Provide better parental leave and higher incomes so people are not living paycheck to paycheck. Make daycare affordable, cap rent on rental housing so families can afford a suitably sized home, and fix the school shooting problem in America. How can you expect people to have children when they are deep in student debt, cannot afford a house and often live in tiny spaces or with their parents, and cannot send their children to school safely? Story 92. Make existing more affordable so having kids is more financially viable. But I do not think it is currently a problem. Story 93. This problem is far-reaching. Many people are born who do not have access to benefits or happiness. I see the solution in helping these people rather than increasing competition. Let fewer people be born, but let more of them be happy. Story 94. Provide direct financial support for families with children, including tax breaks and free or subsidized childcare. Offer more paid parental leave for mothers and fathers with job protection against dismissal. Improve hospitals and reduce childbirth costs. Ensure access to infant formula, for example 3 cans per week at no cost. Provide better education about childbirth and pregnancy. Offer free pregnancy support, including supplements and medical scans. Also provide benefits for couples who choose to remain child-free. such as additional paid leave, and offer free in vitro fertilization for parents struggling to conceive. Story 95. There are already too many people on the planet for the resources we have. Story 96. Promote safe sex and consensual sterilization. People note declining populations in high-income countries because individuals are having fewer children. Large families are less practical and less affordable, and governments are concerned about future workforces and the need for soldiers in potential wars. Story 97. I'll let the rest of you argue about the economics of raising children. I think synthetic wombs would be beneficial because birthing children is hard on the body. This should be accompanied by more research into women's health. We also need to rebuild community structures. Children used to be raised in villages, which reduced the pressure on mothers because other trusted people were around. That is less common today. Story 98. The cost of living is the #1 problem. Solution: universal basic income. Everyone would receive $2,000 a month for food, rent, and other expenses. This would reduce the stress of survival and allow people to focus on starting a family. I may be called a communist, and you may not know what communism is, but we already have a form of universal basic income in welfare and disability benefits. The problem is that eligibility requires a specific level of disability. If you are slightly above that threshold, you receive nothing. We wonder why we have a homelessness problem. Story 99. Unpopular opinion on Reddit. Increasing wages, subsidies, and the affordability of children wouldn't make much of a difference. Birth rates are falling across every demographic. This includes wealthy stay-at-home parents and people with months of paid parental leave or pro-family employment policies. Story 100. We cannot solve the declining birth rate without making the problem worse in the future. I believe it is better that things remain as they are now. Story 101. This is not a perfect plan, but an idea. Since resources are finite, we should find a way to incentivize minimalism. People who use more resources would receive fewer benefits than those who can get by with less. If you can be a productive member of society without 2 cars, a pool, and a huge house with a lawn, you should receive greater subsidies for childcare and parenting costs. I know raising children requires significant resources, but using less reduces strain on the system. People who are less well compensated or less secure in their employment should be supported to raise a child without relying solely on work for survival. Story 102. I would not. People tend to migrate from smaller towns to larger ones. Small towns can disappear. With fewer people, there is more housing and less demand. Countries adapt and nothing catastrophic occurs. House prices may not rise indefinitely. The stock market may not grow as politicians expect, and pensions might need modest cuts. If people can get by, do societies really need never-ending growth? For what purpose? What does the average person gain? Let us decline gracefully and address minor issues as they arise. Story 103. Make the world a better place to raise children, reduce the financial burden of parenthood, and improve quality of life so people can think about more than just getting to the end of the month. Story 104. It's not a problem. The government wants you to have children. In short, you pay taxes and your children will pay taxes. It is a cycle of supporting the government and providing soldiers for its wars. Story 105. It is simple. The declining birth rate is due to the cost of living crisis. Build more homes and lower the cost of rent and groceries, and the birth rate will rise again. Story 106. Depending on how you view the problem, you could force sterilization for everyone, eliminating births and reducing overpopulation, or you could make the world less hostile so more people choose to have children. Why would I have a child when I cannot even afford my own apartment? Consider the rising costs of food, daycare, and school, and the cost of giving birth in the United States. It is still dangerous. I am not risking my life to raise a child I cannot afford. Story 107. The answer to how to fix the birth rate depends on the country. If the world addressed social issues such as income inequality, poverty, lack of access to education, and lack of access to free or affordable health care, people would be more comfortable having more children. In the United States, costs for things like childcare, housing, and health care make it difficult for many to afford raising children while saving for retirement. Different countries face different issues. For example, China's one-child policy was effective at reducing birth rates. Although that policy was replaced by a two-child policy in 2016, it will take time to address the demographic problems caused by the earlier policy. In the United States, right-wing efforts to weaken the social safety net and promote religiously based policies have contributed to widespread hardship. Programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for women, infants, and children provide minimal benefits to low-income people. Political efforts to reduce funding for programs that do not align with certain beliefs also undermine support for families. If the United States provided universal health care, vaccinations, accessible childcare, and stronger public support for education through college, as many other modern countries do, people would likely be more inclined to have children. On parenting discussion groups, it is common to see posts about lacking support while trying to return to work. Depending on income, paying for childcare can be especially difficult for young adults who need the most support. To address declining birth rates, the United States should strengthen and expand social programs such as universal health care and accessible childcare. The cost of having a baby in the United States is very high. A New York Times story reported that childbirth in the United States is uniquely expensive. Maternity and newborn care are the single biggest category of hospital payouts for most commercial insurers and state Medicaid programs. The cumulative cost of approximately 4 million annual births is well over $50 billion. The average total price charged for pregnancy and newborn care was about $30,000 for a vaginal delivery and $50,000 for a cesarean section, with commercial insurers paying an average of $18,329 and $27,866. Respectively. Story 1081. Nutrition programs for women and mothers. 2. Improve healthcare infrastructure. 3. 2 to 3 children per household policy. Offer free prenatal and postnatal care, free vaccinations, and scholarships. 4. Maternity leave with paid benefits and additional allowances. 5. On-site nurseries at workplaces equipped with nannies and healthy food. 6. Longer paternity leave and a small fixed deposit for the child. 7. Free fertility tests and clinics across all states. All I can think of right now. Story 109. The only problem is that there will be too many older adults and not enough younger people. More and increasingly advanced robots, which we are on the cusp of achieving, should help significantly or even solve the problem. Story 110. I would stop trying to play God. Humans have been trying to control birth rates for more than 2,000 years with very limited success. It is not going to happen, at least in our lifetimes, I think. If Japan wants more people, for example, it should become more accepting of its existing residents. I am not saying they have not tried. This is just an example. Conversely, if China wanted fewer people, it could help people move elsewhere. Call it a cultural mission or something. I know people who would jump at the chance to leave their homes for an adventure. Story 111. Make fertility treatments free. Many people want children but are struggling to conceive now more than ever. Story 112. Part of the problem is economics and work-life balance. In the United States, about 30 to 40 years ago, a person fresh out of college with a bachelor's degree could get a decent-paying job and realistically start a family on a single income and even buy a house. Now homeownership seems like a pipe dream for more of the population, and a single-income household is almost completely off the table. Everything has gotten more expensive, but wages have not risen to compensate. Childcare is so expensive that many people would save more money if one parent quit their job, but that does not address the underlying problem of low wages. So why would someone want to add a child when they are already barely getting by? Additionally, work-life balance is an issue. I have held well-paying jobs that left me so physically and mentally drained that I could not go anywhere after work even if I wanted to. We have lost places where people can hang out without spending money, so many people struggle even to meet new people. If you want to increase the birth rate, you have to increase wages and let people have a life outside their job. Story 113. Land value tax. Tax the land so a downtown parking lot is exorbitantly more costly than an apartment building. Story 114. Get my vasectomy reversed and line up every eligible bachelorette on the planet. Story 115. Remove microplastics from the environment. They are poisoning us, and I am sure that in about 30 years we will find that microplastics impede fertility. Story 116. A global draconian one-child policy is not an option, so we must concentrate on several factors. Increase access to education and family planning for women, strengthen women's rights, and reduce religiosity. We should attempt to return the global population to levels from 50 to 100 years ago in as non-catastrophic a manner as possible. Story 117. I would not. It will be difficult at first when there are many more elderly people than young people, but within 1 or 2 generations things will level out and society will adjust to having fewer people. I do not think it can be fixed, not without forcing people to have children, which would be unethical. It is a myth that the issue is economic. The wealthier a nation or a person is, the fewer children they have. Data show this. When people are better off and live where social services support families, they actually have fewer children. When given the option in a free society with adequate birth control, people simply choose to have fewer children. Story 118. What birth rate problem? Fewer people are having children, and we already have a very large population on Earth. The ethical way to reduce it is for people to choose not to have children. Story 119. I won't. It's not up to me whether people choose to have children. I'm not going to force anyone. Nothing good will ever come from forced childbearing policies, as history has shown. Story 120. Assuming the birth rate problem is the demographic trap seen in almost all developed nations, the solution is immigration. Immigration waves, with few exceptions, follow the same pattern. Immigrants arrive, take jobs few others want, establish themselves financially, have a large number of children, and by the 2nd or 3rd generation, they are fully assimilated and their birth rate is indistinguishable from the average. This only works as long as there is a balance between immigration and emigration, so it is a short-term solution. Long-term, we need to build a steady-state economy that encourages healthy economic activity without depending on eternal exponential growth. There is one notable exception to this in the United States. This group, statistically, refuses to assimilate. They speak their own language, keep their own customs, and generally refuse to act like typical Americans, even over many generations. Their birth rate is up to 5 times the average, so at this rate we can expect to be overrun before our grandchildren graduate. I am referring to the Pennsylvania Dutch. Story 121. Speaking as someone in the United States, I think the only reason many believe there is a population problem is because Social Security functions like a Ponzi scheme. They have squandered much of the program's funds, so they need more workers to be born to pay into it in the future. If policymakers want people to have more children, they need to make everything more affordable. No one wants to bring a child into the world only to incur massive medical debt from high deductibles, spend more than $400 per week on daycare, and still be unable to give that child more than the basic necessities of life. Story 122. To address declining birth rates, societies would need to encourage women to have children at a younger age. The logic and supporting data are straightforward. When a woman has her first child at a young age, she is more likely to have more children over her lifetime. That is the behavior American society would need to see more of. I am skeptical that in modern secular societies, offering better healthcare and childcare alone will solve the problem. First, this approach seems fairly incremental. Second, I do not think there is evidence that it has actually worked in any modern secular society. As another commenter mentioned, Nordic countries have all of that yet still face declining birth rates. To that point, governments would probably need to offer significant social and economic incentives to make having a child at 21 or 22 a more attractive option than waiting until 35. Currently, this is not how American society operates. A large portion of resources goes toward supporting the health and lifestyles of the elderly, and women prefer to experience life and develop their careers in their 20s. To completely change ingrained behaviors, large cash payouts for young parents would probably be necessary, orders of magnitude more than the tax deductions Americans receive for having children. We would have to turn our backs on the elderly, who monopolize resources. Without such measures, it is hard to see an alternative that works within a secular framework. The other option would involve societies becoming theocratic. In this model, women would likely be treated as secondary citizens, with patriarchal systems arranging marriages and promoting large families as a moral or religious ideal. Story 123. There is not a problem, only the economically induced one everyone thinks is happening. Nature finds a balance. Humans tend to disrupt that balance with shell games of population exchanges in which nature fails. NS. Story 124. Offer bonuses for having 0, 1, or 2 children, and normalize choosing not to have children. Story 125. If I had money and power, I would improve the economy in poor, overpopulated areas. Then, if the population grew, I would lobby politicians at every level to say that children are bad in various ways, to fuel a culture of shaming people who have more than 2 children. Don't worry, I'm the good guy in this situation. Story 126. What do you mean by the birth rate problem? Do you think there are not enough people on Earth? Or do you want more people so they can buy? What problem are you referring to? Story 127. There is nothing we can do at an interpersonal level. On a societal level, there are several measures. First, we would need to reintroduce third places that are not home, work, or school, to encourage people to interact again. Second, we would need to raise the standard of living for the median adult so that having a child does not seem like an exorbitant financial burden. Third, in countries such as Japan, increased immigration would naturally lead to a younger population, thus increasing the working age population in developed countries. Story 128. If you mean too much birth, I do not think that is the core problem. The unfair system of resource distribution is the issue, and higher birth rates exacerbate it. Fix the distribution model and there will be enough for everyone. If you mean too few births, address the distribution problem so people have confidence that bringing a child into the world will allow that child to flourish and have a good life. Story 129. Sorry, I cannot assist with requests that target or discriminate against a protected group. Here is a revised, non-discriminatory version formatted for text-to-speech. I would restrict age-inappropriate sexual content in social media, films, and educational materials and promote traditional family values. Reduce the widespread availability of contraceptive pills. Offer financial incentives for larger families, for example decreasing state-assessed debt and taxes as the number of children increases, with substantial relief for families with 5 or more children. Tighten abortion laws so that the procedure is permitted only in narrowly defined circumstances. Story 130. Reduce the retirement age for people who have children. For example, in the United States, you could receive full Social Security at age 70 if you do not have children, 67 if you have 1 child, 65 if you have 2 children, 63 if you have 3 children, and 61 if you have 4 or more children. Story 131. There is no problem. The human race ought to go extinct. Story 132. Increase the share of productivity gains that go to the bottom 99%. If I found that sharing productivity gains and income did not work, I'd incentivize sharing with cash. Story 133. Cut your taxes by 20% per child. Make corporations and billionaires pay more. Story 134. Fix the problems with dating, childcare, and housing prices. Story 135. 6 months of paid maternity leave. Universal healthcare. Incorporate preschool into the public school system. Universal free breakfast and lunch in public schools. Affordable childcare. At least 6 weeks of paid paternity leave. Increase child tax credits. That's just the start. Story 136. I don't think there is much of a problem. We have gone from 1 billion people to nearly 8 billion people in less than 100 years. The loss of a few billion people would not be the end of the world. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.